What's going on, everybody? This is John, and guess what? You're sitting here watching Super Positive Games. 2024 is over, and I'm here to break down my 10 favorite games from 10 all the way up to number 1. You know the drill. But first, before I get to the main list, I do have a couple of things to take care of. Namely, a couple honorable mentions, handful of shoutouts, and of course, I'm starting with the worst 3. They are 3 games that I enjoyed the least of 2024. These are Lifeless Moon, Flintlock: The Siege of Dawn, and Animal Well. Animal Well, quite surprising considering it is a critically acclaimed indie game, one of the most well-regarded indie games of 2024. It's a 2D kind of adventure platformer game with an incredible art style and very good music, but I felt like the game, first of all, it's very obtuse. It's a game that makes it a point not to hold your hand, and the thing is, you know, when I think about other games that don't hold your hand, I think about games like Elden Ring, and I think about games like Tunic, both back in 2022. Those games kind of let you out into the world, and they tell you to just figure it out. And you go and explore, and you just kind of poke around the world and see what you could find. You just like move forward and you figure it all out from there. The thing is, though, in a game like Elden Ring, for example, it's a 3D, or it's a third-person 3D open world game, and you could see out in the world different things, different locations and points of interest and chapels and buildings and ruins and stuff to go explore, and you could kind of you could see more of the world in an open world 3D game like Elden Ring. And in Tunic, similarly, to a lesser degree, it's an isometric kind of top-down perspective, but you could still see things that you want to go explore in that much smaller, condensed world of Tunic. Animal Well, as a 2D game where you're going screen to screen, you don't have the luxury of being able to see what's out there all the time in the distance. And so a game like Animal Well, where all the puzzles are extremely hard to identify and then also hard to solve, and you have to, you know, they involve items and things to interact with across multiple screens or across the entire map, and it doesn't tell you what has to do with what, and you just have to kind of poke around. Animal Well just felt a little bit too hard to like figure out what to do and where to go. Not that I need, you know, something telling me where to go at all times, but just like a little, you know, point in the right direction. You just don't get it with Animal Well. I just felt lost. It was a pain getting across the world, the map. You know, there could be a room, there could be like rooms in opposite ends of the entire map where you need to like do stuff, and it's like you don't know that. And so it's like, am I supposed to sit here for the rest of my entire life trying to figure out just what to do in this game? That kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't like the way that this game was designed, despite loving its art style, despite liking its music, and a lot of the game mechanics it introduces are very interesting. I just couldn't get past the design of the world and the obtuseness of the puzzles and all of that. So Animal Well was easily one of the worst experiences I've had within a game in 2024. And so was Flintlock: The Siege of Dawn, a third-person action-adventure game that, for the majority of its playtime, it was okay. The story did not grip me. The world of Flintlock was not interesting to me whatsoever, but it was fine. I still say I was somewhat enjoying my experience in Flintlock. It was not one of my least favorite experiences of the year until I got to the final boss, where my opinion of this game took a turn for the worst in a dramatic fashion, because all these different there's only like a handful of bosses in this game, but all of them except for the final boss, are very basic because this game is centered around this kind of parry system with the flintlock pistol. Almost all the boss fights are focused around that ability, and you just basically stand there in front of these bosses and you hit the parry button at the right time, and that's it. You know what I mean? Like, that's the boss fight. And I was okay with that. I thought that was cool. I thought that was fun, actually, as somebody who likes parrying in games like this. And the mechanics of this game are very solid. But then I got to the final boss fight of the game, and the difficulty spiked dramatically. I don't know what it is. The final boss was supremely frustrating because of how just difficult out of nowhere. It's this extreme difficulty spike, and it has 2 phases. So I think, yeah, you have to fight it obviously from the first phase to the second phase every try, and it was just ridiculous. It just, I wasn't in love with this game to begin with, and then that final boss hit and just fucking shit all over my life for no reason whatsoever. Just drastically different, designed differently from all the other bosses, where it wasn't just focused around the parry mechanic, and that's fine. But why is it also like 10 times more difficult than anything else I've seen in this game right at the end of the game? And I just I started hating this game so much because it's just like, I didn't love this game to begin with, and now I'm getting shit on for no reason, and it was just frustrating. That final boss took me at least like an hour and a half, and it was just the worst. It was the worst. And then Lifeless Moon, my final game in the worst 3. It's an indie game that it's like this indie exploration game that has like sci-fi elements and stuff like that. You're just kind of walking around a world, picking up little notes, listening to, characters. There's some light 3D platforming in there, but I just felt that the game, you feel the low budget. It's a very, very low budget game, and you feel that and you see that as well. It's not a pretty game at all, but also in its art direction and its signposting is poorly done as well, where you could have elements of the environment like a stone little like post as like environmental decoration, but then they'll use the same post as something, as like a switch that you need to interact with in the world, but they won't alter its appearance in any way whatsoever. So you're seeing all these pieces of decoration, and then they use one of them. They just kind of copy paste it as one of like the switches to interact with to move forward, and they don't change it. And so you don't really know that that's what you have to interact with, because it looks like all the other posts that are just in part of the environmental design. This game is not designed well from a visual. It doesn't have a great visual language, and a lot of the things and items that you pick up, like the notes and stuff on the ground, are they don't stand out as well. So like I could see how like 99% of people can miss this, and I often miss notes and items on the ground as well in the environment. It's just, when I look back on the year, Lifeless Moon, it did nothing for me narratively at all. It has some interesting ideas from like a sci-fi perspective. It's a very surreal game, which I appreciate, but it's just not a pretty game to look at, but also it's designed poorly and has not great signposting, and items get lost in the environment. It just was not a fun game, and I actively thought to myself, wow, I'm not enjoying this as I was playing it actively. So Lifeless Moon, part of the worst 3, but let's be a little bit more positive right now. Okay? Well, it's time to get into talk about some games that I actually did enjoy and have a great time with in 2024. But before I get to my 2 honorable mentions, I have a couple shout-outs. First and foremost, they are Alone in the Dark, Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster, Arzette the Jewel of Faramore, and Indica. These are 4 games that I enjoyed quite a bit. They were really tough to cross off the list when I was making my top 10. But I thought that it deserved a little bit of a shout out. some really cool games there. But onwards to my 2 honorable mentions. Now remember, these are in no particular order. I'm going to start off with what you're seeing on the screen right this very moment. It's Marvel Rivals is one of my 2 honorable mentions. Marvel Rivals came out very, very late in the year, but it turned out to be perhaps my favorite multiplayer game of 2024. Of course, it's essentially third-person Overwatch in the Marvel universe with all these different Marvel heroes. I think it launched with 33 Marvel heroes from across all corners of Marvel. You got you got some X-Men in there. You got all 6 of the original Avengers. You got some Guardians of the Galaxy in there, and a bunch of other characters in between. You got your basic modes like Payload, which is my favorite. In Overwatch 2, which is what this game gets compared to all the time, the Payload matches are my favorite. I'm not as big a fan of capture points. I like that linear kind of front line, back line thing, and when you get into a capture point, things get a little messy. It gets a little bit brawly in there. You don't have as much team structure or formation in a capture point. But those are just like some of the simple capture point payload mode. And I think the maps and modes in this game, how they're named, is very confusing because you have like the map like world like Wakanda, but then you have like sub map names and they're associated with different modes and whatever. It's confusing as hell. But I thought all the maps are or at launch were really cool. I liked the Marvel universe, and I like having all these different cool Easter eggs and places to explore. Huge highlight of this game is the art style. I thought I would hate this art style, but I actually like it quite a bit. It's like kind of this cel shaded design. I think it looks beautiful. But yeah, Marvel Rivals has a huge roster, which is of course split into 3 different classes. There's Vanguard, which is tank, Strategist, which is support, and then Duelist, which is damage or DPS. And of course, most of the heroes are in the damage class, and some of the most popular Marvel heroes ever, like Spider-Man, Wolverine, Iron Man, are in that damage class as well. So as you can imagine, there's no role queue or role lock in here like there is in Overwatch. So you're going to get matches where you have 3 or 4 damage teammates, and that kind of stinks, but it's manageable. This is a 6v6 game, so I mentioned this 2 years ago with Overwatch 2, where a 6v6 format allows for off-kilter class compositions, right? Where it doesn't have to be 2-2-2. In 5v5 in Overwatch 2, for example, it has to be the 2-2-1 comp. All right, otherwise everything will fall apart. When you have that extra player, you could get a little bit more flexible with what class that is. And so, having 3 or 4 damage heroes sometimes isn't the end of the world. You could get by. You know what I mean? I think that I love the art style, but going back on that for just a brief moment, I feel like this game's heroes feel very like they feel paper mache, and I think that has a lot to do with the art style. They feel very lightweight to control, and there's a lot of melee heroes in this game as well, and they don't feel the best. But I kind of grew it all grew on me. The feel of the game has grown on me the more I kept playing. I mainly, so as for my mains, I play a lot of tank. I'd say my number 1 main in tank is, or Vanguard, I'm sorry. Okay. I'd say I'm a bigger Magneto player, right? He kind of compares a little bit to Overwatch 2 Sigma, and he's really great on those linear path payload game modes. He's really fun. You got the little shield. You've got the the little pushback ability. I forget what all this stuff is called. And his ultimate is where he builds up a huge ball. I remember one time on a payload we had like 1 more inch to go to win the game, and it was an overtime on a payload, And I had my ultimate, my Magneto ultimate. When he triggers it, he goes up into the air and floats. I float up in the air, and there's like a wall in front of my head where the ball is being formed, and my cursor's down where I needed the ultimate to go, mind you. All right, so my cursor is pointed at the enemy team on the ground, but the ball, when I launched it, hit the wall above my head instead, and we lost that match. And I might have had the game-winning ultimate on the line, and I fucked it up, blew it into a wall. These team-up abilities are really fun as well. I don't pick my hero based on these team-up abilities. I kind of view them as just like a cool bonus if another teammate happens to pick a synergistic hero with what you're rolling with. Magneto's team-up is with Scarlet Witch. She gives him these kind of projectile blades, these red blades that he could launch towards the enemy. And at first I thought they were melee only. And then I learned, these actually they launch. They're a ranged projectile. You know, those things are fun to use. So Magneto's my number one Vanguard at the moment. And then I'd say my number two Vanguard is probably Captain America, melee hero. Throwing the shield, sprinting around, doing the super jump and all that. That's a ton of fun. But you really need a good team behind you, or otherwise, because you have to get up in the other team's business to do your damage as Captain America. You need to make sure your team's behind you, supporting you, or you're going to get fucked up, okay? You know, as for duelists, my number one duelist is probably Black Widow. I have fallen in love with sniping in Marvel Rivals with Black Widow specifically. I think her weapon, I just like the sound of her weapon. I like the feel of her sniper. It's not really a one-hit kill, but like it's so satisfying to get those eliminations. The kill sound is incredible, and just like the sound of the rifle as she loads the next round is a blast. I just don't like her ultimate. Her ultimate, she goes into first person and has this charge up blast gun or whatever. It just kind of, I guess its purpose is to like weaken some like the back line so that you could get one hit sniper shots on them to follow up. But yes, Black Widow is an absolute blast, and I do find a lot of success with Black Widow, mind you. So she's probably my favorite duelist. As for another duel, I'm kind of blanking. I pick Punisher a lot. I got into some Winter Soldier as well. That's a hero where you have to know how to combo his moves, because he only has 3 rounds before he has to reload his pistol, but using any of his 3 arm abilities automatically reloads his weapon. So you got to cycle those things according to plan so that you don't have to reload as often. That's how you kind of got to play Winter Soldier. And his ultimate's a ton of fun because you could use it as many times as because when you use it, he launches into the air and slams down with his arm attack in this big AoE, and it marks enemies who are hit. And if one of those marked enemies dies, he gets his ult back immediately. So you could use that thing like 6 times in a row potentially. So you could just use it over and over and over again if you get the kills to follow up with the enemies that you mark. Just a blast of a game. And then as for strategist, right, the supports, Mantis is my main support. Luna Snow I have a lot of fun with as well. I also kind of got into a little bit of Rocket Raccoon on the side. He's fun to use as well, but you got to be careful not to, be a heal bot and just heal too much and not do any supportive damage. But Marvel Rivals, I think easily probably my favorite multiplayer game of 2024. It was a absolute pain. It was incredibly painful to cross this one off the list. Heartbreaking, because I really did think it would make the list, but at the end of the day, when the rubber met the road, it didn't make it. How about I move on to my other honorable mention, Balatro. Balatro set the gaming world on fire, and it set my world on fire as well earlier in 2024. It's a roguelike poker inspired game where you're your main goal is to beat the blind of the round and move on to the next round until you beat all, I think, 8 antes, and then it goes into an endless mode if you win. And you got to build, you have all these different, I think 150 different jokers that have different kind of multipliers, and you could make all these fun builds. And you got to play these poker hands, and you could upgrade things and buy from a shop in between rounds. And I adored this game's music. I love this game's art style. It has like the little horizontal scan lines, like an actual like casino, like poker machine. The music's great. There's nothing more satisfying in this game than setting your chips and malt meter on fire, because if you get a higher enough score, you get this little fire animation in the corner. I just love the layout of the screen, having all the information on the left panel, and then your cards on the bottom, and then up top are all your jokers that you've acquired and upgraded, and this game is just a blast, and part of it is just re-rolling, right? Just starting a fresh run, seeing what kind of stuff you could get up to with these jokers, seeing what kind of poker hand you want to main as you kind of rise through the ranks and hit the shop. And this game is just a ton of fun. Like, what else can I say? Really, it's addictive as hell. It's hard to quit. I played it on and off throughout 2024. So it didn't like have a stranglehold on me like most other people. I was able to like break away from it throughout the year, but I couldn't get enough of it, and definitely one of the more unique games that I've played in 2024. I've never really been a huge fan of deck builder games, but this game, I love its simplicity. It's just cards, right? Most deck builders are like fantasy themed or sci-fi themed or and all this other stuff. I just like simple casino poker cards and really cool jokers. When I talk about these jokers, shout out to the ice cream joker, by the way. Part of why I really loved these jokers are the designs of, like, the art designs of the cards. Some of them are ripped in half. Some of them are Polaroid photograph, like they're shaped differently. I just love the look of these. The aesthetic of this game is incredible, and almost made it on my list because of its aesthetic and music and its art with those jokers. It's just really cool having just all 5 or 6 of your jokers. So you could have, there are ways to get to raise the max amount of jokers you could carry. But just, seeing all of them up there, up top, and then having, the middle of the screen for the cards that you play. It's just, I love the layout of the screen, as I already mentioned. I think my favorite joker is probably the misprint, because it gives you a random mult. And when I say mult, I mean like a multiplier number. So what you want to do is, in this game, is you want to get enough chips, but you also want to get a lot of multiplier to combine with those chips to get the highest number possible at the end of all your hands. You get like, I think, it depends on which deck you're playing with, but you get like 4 or 5 hands to start out with per round, and you got to make sure you hit that blind. But the misprint joker gives you a random number every time, and I just love the fun of that. It could make or break your run, and whether or not you hit the number you need to hit. But yeah, I'm blanking on all the Joker names and what they do, but Misprint is the one that stood out to me because of the randomness. I love the randomness of Balatro. Getting into a fresh game, you don't know what you're gonna get. You don't know what new Joker card you're gonna find. Absolute blast. It was a real pain. It was really painful to cross this one off the list because it did not end up making my top 10. Speaking of, how about I get into that top 10 right this very moment? All right, we're going to start with my number 10, obviously. EA Sports College Football 25. I have never played a college football video game in my entire life. I've always played Madden throughout the years and whatever, and I've weaned off of Madden like the last half decade or so, or decade really. College Football 25 kind of took over the kind of fall season for me. I could not pull myself away from this game. I think you could say I was kind of addicted to it, where I would kind of set out to play some other game, and then I'd go, oh, well, before I jump into that, why don't I do a game or two of College Football 25 first? And I would do that, and I'd play a game, and then I'll play one more game. And then before you know it, it's the end of the night, and I've only played college football. That has happened once or twice, but it was so hard to turn on my console and not play a game of College Football 25 first. With this game, what I love the most about this game is the fact that I think there's like 120 or 150 different schools. And I love how, you have the big schools like Ohio State, Alabama, LSU, and all that. But you also have plenty of more niche, like unknown schools in here, like Tulsa and Kansas State, stuff like, I love getting into and learning about kind of all these different much lesser known programs like Toledo, Sam Houston, stuff like that, and going, playing games in these teams' stadiums that kind of look like high school football fields. Not every team in this game has the big arena, like Ohio State and Alabama and stuff like that. And I just loved kind of those smaller football fields, especially when you set the game time to like dusk and like sunset. Oh my God, this game can get really beautiful. I know, these games are not known for like their environments or how pretty their environments can be, and that's largely to do with the crowd not looking great. And the crowd does not look good in this game either, like any other Madden game or football or football game. But just like the layout of the stadiums and the sunset in the back, there's some really nice views to be had in this game, especially in those kind of smaller high school-y looking football fields where it's just kind of like bleachers and it's not just giant stadium, this NFL style stadium. So that was cool, playing with the different uniforms from some of these schools. And I will say one thing I wish this game had is like a tournament system. I know the college football playoff it's just freshly been restructured, but I would have liked some kind of built-in playoff tournament mode in this game where you don't have to play through a whole season, because there's I think it's called the Dynasty mode, where you can play like a whole season as a team, but it's through like the head coach where that you have to control or whatever. There's also your own create a player where you can like create. I created a quarterback for Michigan, and I like that perspective where it brings you like almost like a third person view, and you're kind of playing from like right behind your quarterback's back. And I assume that's the same with other players if you choose different positions in that mode. But I will say, this game, I played it so much that it kind of helped me learn more about what a football defense is, mainly speaking like the secondary, because I never really fully understood what corners do and I know what safeties do, but like the ins and outs of those positions, those defensive back positions, and what the different coverages mean and stuff, and how to read that stuff as a quarterback. This game, I learned from this game quite a bit. In the past, my whole life, I always avoided throwing to go routes down the field, because I always thought, oh well, there's no cut. There's no break in the route where the receiver gets free and you have a window. It's just a straight line. And I always thought there's no way to throw these over-the-top go routes, because it's a straight line and the defender's going to be right there anyway. The defender's not going anywhere. There's no break in the route. But this game taught me how to read that route and how you have to look at whether your receiver wins the route, and you also have to read the safety and see. So what you end up doing is you have your eye, instead of having your eyes only on the receiver, because it's a straight line, you don't have to look at him. you have to look. You have to have your eyes on the safety and whether the safety is drifting away from the route, and also whether the corner on the receiver lost the route and is a step behind. Then you can launch the ball down the field, and your receiver will be up in front to be able to grab it. I fucking fell in love whenever I got, because I only go with the coach suggested plays. Whenever I got an opportunity to go for a go route, I fucking lit up like a Christmas tree because I loved reading the safety and I loved seeing whether my receiver is going to win the route. And oh my God, when you see your receiver a step or two ahead of the corner and you see the safety drift away, oh, it's incredible. You just let that thing go and it's an automatic touchdown. And I never did that in any Madden games that I've ever played. You know, this game taught me how to read that and go for that. But yeah, like, big shout out. I could not stop playing this game throughout the entire fall season. The music as well, all the band, all the music in this game is college like marching band music, and it's fucking incredible. Even during the games, or there's some other music that plays like in the stadium as part of like the crowd ambiance or whatever. But the band music in this game is fucking incredible as well. Shout out to EA Sports College Football 25. You're my number 10. Let's get to number 9. It's Harold Halibut. Harold Halibut is a indie adventure game fully animated with claymation. That's right. They hand-built all of the environments, they hand-built all of the characters with clay, and they scanned them into the game. I've never seen anything like it. Obviously, there have been games that, like Lost in Random, for example, or the upcoming South of Midnight, games that have like a claymation look to them. But I don't think they were actually hand-created. I could be wrong, but I don't think they were actually hand-created and brought into the game like Harold Halibut, like the developer Slow Bros did for this game. This game took, I think, like a decade for this team to make, and this game turned out pretty amazing. The voice work in this game is incredible. All you're really doing is it takes place on this ship that crashed on an alien planet, and it's like underwater. And the ship is called the Fedora, and it still has like residents and a society, a community among it. And they kind of like adapted to just living on this crashed planet, and this is just where we live now. And all you're really doing is Harold Halibut. He's kind of like I guess like a mechanic or like a janitor type of role. And he also helps out some of like the scientists, and he's friends with a lot of people. The voice work in this game is fucking incredible. But all you're really doing is going through and walking around and talking to people, and it's a narrative adventure game. But I will say, like, the environments are fucking phenomenal. There's like the arcade area, which has like a couple different shops. There's this one little kind of botany room that's tucked away. All these different gadgets and gizmos and stuff like that. Like the sound design of this game is incredible. It has a real like identity to it, which does wonders for this game's atmosphere and tone. And fuck, this game's world is amazing. But the game's narrative is really, really strong as well. It I don't want to spoil anything, but it kind of grapples with the idea of, okay, we've crashed on this planet. We've been here for X amount of years. I think like 80 something years or whatever. I don't know the actual number, but they've been there for a long time. And their scientists are still working on a solution to figure out how to get their ship back out into space and get back on track to where they were going. And not everybody wants to leave. Some people have grown content just living here on this crashed Fedora ship, on this planet, on this random water planet. And it's this conundrum of this kind of existential crisis of what else is out there? Are we content just living here for the rest of our lives and dying here? do we really want to figure this out? And, some of the scientists do want to figure out. Some other scientists, or I guess shop owners, I'm not going to get into specifics, have their own ideas and their own plans for what they want for the Fedora, and figuring that all out and going through these crises and questions and pondering life with these characters is special. This is a special narrative. I wouldn't say it's my favorite narrative of the year. We'll get there. Later on in this list. But it's certainly one of the better narratives of this game. And there's a moment at the end of this game that really solidified this game is one of my favorites of the year. I'm not going to get into specifics, but like there's this kind of alien community that Harold gets involved with, and he gets to visit there. And I'm going to put the spoiler tag up here right now, so just bear with me. But there's this little community of fish people, and his good friend Wii, who also lives there. I loved Wii and the name Wii as well. But there's this shot where, because part of Harold's conundrum is he's made an incredible friend in Wii U, and he loves Wii U's community. And when it comes time for the Fedora to leave, because they come up with the solution, we're gonna fly out of here. And spoilers for all this again in bright red letters. Do not listen on. Harold says goodbye to Wii U in the fish community before going to get on the ship to leave. And there's this moment, this incredible moment where this music kicks in. It's this third person really behind his head, really close behind his head, as he turned around and walks back through the community in slow motion towards the door to go back to the Fedora and leave the planet. And it's in slow motion, really tight behind his head. You're still controlling him, but it's, again, in slow motion. So you're going, it's very slow. And this music, I forgot the song that's playing. I have to go look it up. And that is such an incredibly strong emotional moment. That's where the game uses the music. It uses the slow motion. It uses that camera position to fucking hit me in the heart. And it was incredible. I'm going to stop talking spoilers for right now, but fucking that was an amazing moment. Probably my favorite moment in the entire game. This game is an absolute trip. It does some really weird psychedelic stuff. Again, I adore the characters. I adore the voice work in this game. This game, I think if you're a fan of indie games, if you're a fan of narrative adventure games, this is a must play for you. Especially with this art style, the environments. It's fucking amazing. What Slow Bros did with this, and I think this might have been their first game, is something special here. Go play Harold Halibut. It's fucking incredible. But I gotta move on now to my number 8 game of 2024, Conscript. Conscript is a isometric pixel art Resident Evil style survival game set in World War I. That sentence right there, holy cow. Conscript was probably the scariest game that I played all year, and not because of the atmosphere. Well, I mean, the atmosphere had a lot to do with it. But this game's survival mechanics, it really does not give you any help. You will go long stretches of time at half health or a shrivel of health, and this game does not do you any favors whatsoever. First off, this game's environments and the sound design of walking through mud, walking on bricks or slate or bullet shells. This game has incredible sound design. This game has an incredible atmosphere, incredible music to go along with it. I've never played a game quite like Conscript before. I love Resident Evil style survival games. I've never played an isometric Resident Evil style survival game until now. And this is phenomenal. This kind of blew me away. And I kind of really fell in love with, and I got really in tune with exploring the different environments, exploring the different rooms, finding key items, finding new resources, and this game just does not give you any handouts. There's a different, there's like a shotgun, there's a rifle that you could find, and the combat in this game is it can be very stiff. You do have the ability to roll as well, so you could dodge enemy attacks. This game there are moments in this game where it throws at you a lot of different enemies in these kind of trench defense moments where you're getting like attacked by like waves of enemies and you have to survive, and there are stronger like brute armored enemies that come in, and it gets really hectic. So combat in this game can be a bit scary at times when you're getting like attacked in those moments, but in this game, to shoot you have to stand still and you have to let the cursor shrink down to be as accurate as possible. So the game, there's no like run and gun in this game. It's not an action game whatsoever. The combat's very, very slow on purpose, and it makes you kind of stand still to be able to get your shots off and to reload, because you have to, and especially with the rifle, you have to manually, chamber the next bullet. With the rifle, you have to manually pump the shotgun, and reloading can take a long time in this game as well. So this game has ways of gluing you in place momentarily, and when you're getting overrun by enemies in those particular moments, watch out. All right? I mean, the game has an armor, so there are moments where because, oh man, I have no healing items and I have a sliver of health, instead of just rolling with no health, I could repair a piece of armor like halfway and just roll with armor. Right? So there are different ways of getting around that kind of lack of health. There are like repair kits and armor that you could repair, and you could roll that way. But another interesting mechanic this game has are, when you kill an enemy, and you have to retread a lot of ground in this game because it's a Resident Evil style game, and there are a lot of puzzles that you have to, find keys for, and you have to retread a lot of areas and go back and forth. When you kill an enemy somewhere, over time, if you come back a little bit later to that spot, the corpse will be surrounded by rats that are feasting on it, and these rats will actually attack you and like poison you and damage you if you try and get through. To combat this, the game gives you fuel and a lighter so that when and in very limited quantity, so you're not going to be able to do this for every enemy you kill everywhere, but using the fuel and the lighter on these deceased enemies will burn them, and then it will prevent the rats from coming out so that you could pass through again later on without worrying. The thing is, you don't have fuel for every enemy, so you have to really figure out when you kill an enemy, is this an area that I'm going to be needing to come back through later? And I loved kind of figuring out, okay, this is kind of like in the corner of the map in like some hallway somewhere that I'm probably not going to need to come through again. I don't need to burn this enemy. Let the rats come and feast. Whereas a different scenario, oh man, this is like in the middle of like a crossroad in like an area where I need to get around to do different things and go different places. Got to pull out the fuel and the lighter, burn this enemy that I just killed so that I don't have to worry about rats. But there are some moments where I didn't have the fuel to do that, and I did have to run through these areas with the rats chasing me, and you have limited stamina as well. So, that's a thing to manage as well. But like that whole rat mechanic added so much fear to this game because it's like, fuck, I got to go over there, but it's filled with rats. But that's the only place I need to go right now. And it's just preparing to like get in there and run like hell and maybe do like a little dodge over the rats to make sure. But man, this game scares the shit out of me, resource wise, and those rats, right? They scare you. And there's this town area late in the game that's just filled with, it's just a large town, and there are enemies everywhere. And when you kill all those enemies, you don't have enough fuel to burn all of them, but it's a whole area where you have to get around over and over again. The rats just filled up that area, and it became really scary to run through there with a little sliver of health left, maybe a little bit of armor. Incredible game. Incredible survival, like Resident Evil style survival game. Great art. I will say though, on the art front, the trench areas are really well designed, but when you get into some more like open woodsy area, it's not an open world by any means, but there's these areas that are like in the woods with like trees and branches and puddles. Some of these environments there, it's hard to tell what branch you could walk over or what puddle you could walk through in those areas. So like the environmental, like the art kind of can be a little confusing in those spots, but the trench areas are where, none of that happens in the trench areas. It's all clear cut. You know where you can and can't go on the ground. And so, I got really, really in tune with learning the layout of each area. The map is great. And I connected with the gameplay of this game, the moment-to-moment gameplay of this game very strongly. And the sound design of all that, like I mentioned, one of my favorite games of the year by far, Conscript. But let me move on now to my number 7 game of 2024. It's going to be Persona 3 Reload. This game, oh man, this is a long game. And there is another game much higher on this list that is about equally as long, if not maybe a little shorter. Persona 3 Reload is fucking really long, and at points to its detriment. I think that, I'll get into the things that I love about this game, but on the game's length really quickly, I don't think this game's length is supported well enough by the physical size of the game in terms of the map and the world. Additionally, I don't think the length of this game is supported enough by the game's music and how it's used. This game has some incredible music, but I feel like they don't switch it up enough for an 80 to 100 hour experience. They do at the very, very end in like the last month. If you go for the good ending that last month, I'm specifically talking about the dorm music, for example, they do switch that up. But the other parts of the game and that fucking dorm music for 80 hours of this game, I started to not feel so great about this. So I don't think the length of this game is serviced well enough by the use of the music. The music's great, most of it, or the size of the game's explorable areas in like the day-to-day life around the dorm, the school, Polonium Mall. I just think those elements, this is not like an open world game or anything, but like I feel like I needed another area to open up. The only thing that changes in the world throughout this 80, 100 hour game are 1 or 2 shops are added in the month of July. That's it. I needed a little bit more change. And I know the game goes into, has some like moments off on like summer vacation or like a school trip, but those are very, very brief moments and they're very, very small. I needed throughout the duration of the game, I needed the core areas of the world, the explorable world, to expand just a little bit. Just a little bit. Give me something, just give me a little something more here. Give me a little bit more change with the stores and the shops, or maybe like an extra job can pop up in like September or October somewhere. Because you could do like little jobs. You could work like a coffee shop, at a movie theater, and one other place, I think. Like I just needed a little bit more change throughout this duration, this very, very long game in its world and in its music. I brought up the month of July. I really fell in love with the structure of this game and how it works. This kind of calendar system. You go from like day to day and you do these different things, and I loved having to like decide what I wanted to do, because each day is broken up, and depending on the type of day it is. If it's a day off, I think you have one extra window, but most days are structured like you have, after school time, evening time, or lunchtime and stuff like that. And you advance the game by doing an activity, whether that's eating a meal to increase your kind of charisma stats, or if that's hanging out with like a schoolmate, or hanging out with like a school club, or hanging out with one of the other members of C's in your dorm. There are these different activities that can have different effects on your stats and with your relationships, in your friendships. Like I loved choosing what do I genuinely want to do, because I know some people go through this game and they want to do a specific build or focus on a specific stat. I felt like, what do I genuinely want to do right now in this moment? Do I want to go eat ramen? Do I want to hang out with the track team after school? I just really fell in love with the structure of this game and the calendar system. I don't think I've ever really played anything like this. This was my first ever Persona game, might I add. I've never played a Persona game before this one. And so like this kind of system is new to me. And at first, when I first started this game, I was greatly confused, because I was like, all right, where do I need to go next? What do I do next? Like I was waiting for like a mission log. I was waiting for like maybe a quest marker. None of that. It's just you go to school, you come back, you hang out, and the day moves to the next day and you do more stuff and you go back to school. And I love the routine of that, and how this game is structured really, really spoke to me. I've never experienced anything quite like this before. As for the combat, almost all the combat takes place in this place called Tartarus, which, I really do. I love turn-based combat. I think Persona 3 Reload's combat is incredible. I love the kind of all-out system where if you knock every enemy down, you get to do an all-out attack for a ton of damage. And if you kill an enemy during an all-out attack, you get to choose one of these different cards that have different effects. I loved also the element system, where each enemy has a weakness and you have to figure that weakness out. Sometimes by experimenting, other times with the help of one of Fuka's abilities, who can like scan enemies and find that out for you on the spot. But figuring out an enemy's weakness and hitting them with that weakness makes them go down. And if all enemies that you're facing go down, you can trigger that all-out attack. So I love just, especially early on, just focusing on that weakness to get them all knocked down and then wiping them all out. It's the fucking best. I love that system. Really, really great turn-based system. I will say, though, a lot of the Personas have these kind of boost abilities where it's like an electric boost or these different kind of... I used some of the buffs. I used like the raise the party's defense or stuff like that. So I used some of the buffs, but some of like those other weird ones where it boosts a type of damage attack, I didn't use any of those. I think, turn-based games, I don't like getting too in the weeds with different kinds of boost abilities and buff abilities and stuff like that. I use buffs. I use like the more simpler buffs, but like stuff that's a little more out there where it's like, do I really need to be wasting a turn using this ability that I'm not really sure how it works or if it's going to be worth it in this fight? So there are some buff abilities or like auto boost abilities or whatever they're called that I just never really got into. But let me talk about the narrative and the story. This I fucking loved building out this crew. Right? You are a new transfer student and you're brought in by Sanada and Mitsuru, who are like the two heads. I think Mitsuru is like the president of this kind of student club that like fights Tartarus and does all this stuff in the dark hour, right? And I love this crew where it starts out, it's just really just you, Yukari, Mitsuru, and Sanada, and you go through the game and you slowly start to accumulate more and more members to the club and you bring them in. And I just loved having a new character to talk to, a new character to hang out with. There's Ken, who's like this little grade school kid who comes in and he becomes part of the team. There's Kuromaru, who's this dog who comes in as part of the team, and these characters you can use them in combat. I love selecting who I wanted to use, and I always change it. Although I will say I kind of got stuck with a couple characters because there is a mechanic later on that gets introduced that allows you to like automatically boost a character's stat that you haven't been using, so that they get up to speed with where everybody else is at, and you could use them in combat viably. So there's a mechanic like that later in the game that you could find in Tartarus. But I love just like kind of who do I send to the bench, who do I have starting for me in Tartarus, and I just love this crew of characters, and I loved as the game goes on because there's this mentor called named Itagaki, I think his name is, who's kind of like the club advisor. He's like a teacher at the school, I believe, or he's on like the board or whatever. But he's like this adult, and he's there, and sometimes he shows up, and he's like, Mitsuru's the president, but she's also a student. The advisor Itagaki's also there, but then stuff happens where I'm not going to get into spoilers, but like characters kind of go away, and then Mitsuru becomes like the actual leader. There's nobody higher in the organization than her after a certain point. And I just love the kind of hierarchy of the club. And Sonata's like the number 2, and then they get I forgot what his name was. I'll put him on screen. The other older character that was part of like the original 3. It was him, Sonata, and Mitsuru to start the club. I thought that this narrative, and I loved later on in the game where this crew is faced with this existential threat. And they kind of have to decide, and this is like the main choice in the game, late in the game. They have to decide whether they're facing this unbeatable threat where they know that they cannot beat this. And they have to decide whether they want to try anyway and go out fighting, or if they want to kind of do this thing that allows them to become oblivious to the end of the world. So that they don't have to deal with the pain. The world could just end naturally without them knowing it's going to end, and they could go in peace. Right? In doing this choice, I chose the latter. Spoiler alert. And that's the bad ending. The good ending is you fight to your last breath. And so the thing is, I beat this game, technically. I rolled credits on this game because I did the bad ending. But if you do the good ending, there's a whole extra month. So right now, and I've paused on the game, it's on the shelf for right now, but where I'm at currently is I reloaded the save after getting the bad ending and beating the game. I reloaded the save and playing that final month for the good ending. So I don't know what happens in the good ending. I don't know if it's true that the world is going to inevitably end at the end of January in the game. So I don't know. But I did beat the game. I beat this game. All right, it took me like 110 hours or something like that. Fucking insanely long game, but I think it was worth it. I do have some complaints and some gripes about it. Mainly its length and how it's not. Certain elements of the game don't really support that length, but. I did really enjoy my time with this. Mainly, I would say I enjoyed the social sim elements of this game far more than I enjoyed Tartarus. I will say that definitively, because Tartarus does also get a little repetitive in there. I usually would go until like the next barrier boss fight, and I would dip out. So I'd play like 5 or 6 floors. And I love kind of choosing which day of the week I wanted to go to Tartarus. It was usually like a Saturday. The game leaves it up to you entirely, right? Because I don't think you're forced to go to Tartarus. I think you should if you want to like actually beat the game, because you need to like level up your stats and become stronger. But the game leaves it entirely up to you on when you want to go. You could go whenever day of the week, however many times of the day. I mean, if you go every night, you're in for like a 800-hour game. There is a cap at Tar. I think it's like 260 floors. So there's a cap there, and I don't know what happens when you get to the end. I think that's part of like the good ending where you have to get to the end or whatever. But man, yeah, Tartarus does get a little bit repetitive. They throw you a bone every now and again, and they switch up the environments and the kind of flavor of the different kind of sectors. I forget what the sectors are called, but so they do change it up occasionally, but it can get a little repetitive going through Tartarus. But being able to decide what day of the week you want to go to Tartarus helps with that. Because oh man, I do Tartarus every Saturday, but it's Sunday now, and I can enjoy some social sim elements and get out there and go to another week of school and enjoy all that. But Persona 3 Reload, lovely, lovely game, really nice story. I love the kind of summer vacation trips and the characters, and the characters in this game are fucking incredible, and how they interact and the friendships that you make and the bonds. I love JRPGs. I mean, almost every JRPG, that's a core element, is characters and bonding with those elements. And we'll get to another incredible JRPG later on this list. But why don't I move on from Persona 3 Reload and get to my number 6, Braid Anniversary Edition. This is a remaster of the, I believe, 2010 game, a classic puzzle game. This Braid Anniversary Edition was, I know last year Cocoon, my number 4 game last year, was, I consider that one of my favorite puzzle games of all time, if not my favorite puzzle game ever. Braid Anniversary Edition, hands down, the most difficult puzzle game I've ever played. My first 20 minutes of this game, I really thought that I wasted my money, because I thought that there was no way in hell I would ever be able to beat it. This game is fucking really, 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 really hard. And it's not just the platforming elements, because it is a puzzle platformer to a degree, where you do have to do a little platforming in there. But this game is really fucking hard, and I really thought that, man, I'm never going to beat this. Like 20 minutes in, I was like, fuck, that's it. I just wasted my money. I'm never going to be able to beat this. But the thing is, I beat it, and I was able to beat this game, and this is such an accomplishment. I'm so proud of myself for this. Because I beat this game only having used a guide for one early puzzle in the game. I used a guide for, like, the World 1, there's a puzzle that I used a guide for. But I beat this game largely without any guides, almost at all. I used a guide once for one puzzle, but the rest of the game, I beat all on my own, and I'm incredibly proud because of that. This game made me feel like a fucking genius. I'm not a genius, but this game made me feel like one for sure. Because I just ended up and I love and I'll get into how this game is structured, because I love so this game is structured in a way where it's almost like a puzzle. It's like a gallery of puzzles. Like, it's like you're in an art museum, and each puzzle is its own like picture and its own painting. And each world is divided into little like sub-worlds or whatever. And you go into a world and you see a puzzle. And naturally I think, that's a puzzle, and there's like a puzzle piece up there that I could grab. But the path continues forward a little bit more, and there's a completely separate puzzle in this same little world that's not connected to that one, but it's a whole other puzzle with another puzzle piece in there. And then, I could continue walking even further, or ignore the second puzzle, and there's the door to the next level, and you could just enter it and go to the next level. And the same thing happens there, where, I could just walk past all these puzzles. Are all these things optional? And then you learn, okay, well, I actually need all those puzzle pieces to be able to progress the game, and that's where the game kicks in. But you could waltz through these worlds without touching most of these puzzles and like get to the last world. You know what I mean? But you're not going to beat the game because you didn't do any of the puzzles. So you got to go back and you got to do the puzzles. And I just loved how that's laid out, where it allows you to come back later as well when you get stuck. And I did a lot of that, where it's like, man, this puzzle is rough. I'm going to move on and do this other puzzle. I'm going to come back here later, and maybe with like a different game mechanic, or I think each game mechanic is introduced depending on which world you're in. But yeah, you have the ability to like rewind, and when you die, you die. So you have to like rewind time every time you die. You have to rewind yourself and then kind of avoid that death or whatever. But I just loved how this game is laid out and how it's designed. And, there are several different really cool game mechanics. Like I think one of the late game ones is this ring that when you drop on the ground, everything there's like this little circle around it where time slows down. So you could use that ring, and I'm not going to try to explain any of these puzzles. They're all really, 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 really difficult to even accomplish. They're difficult to figure out what the hell you actually have to do first and foremost. I spent a lot of this game just standing there staring at puzzles because just trying to figure out what I have to do and then actually executing it. Like I would just stare at these puzzles for like 15, 20 minutes, maybe like walk around, pace around with my character back and forth, trying to look at all the different moving pieces and parts of the puzzle. And this enemy drops down there, but this one is on that platform that can move across there. And just staring at these puzzles and playing around with them and just sitting there and looking at them helped so much. And those light bulb moments that came from that were incredible. The music's great, and of course the art style is incredible. This is a remastered game. I never played the original, but I imagine it looks a lot better with this anniversary edition remaster here. Yeah, probably one of the best puzzle games I've ever played. It's probably the hardest puzzle game I've ever touched. And because of that, I felt really proud once I beat it, especially having not used any guides except for one early game puzzle, which, by the way, was crazy because like the game, it's weird because when you get puzzle pieces, you have to go into a part of the world and place them on this board. And the one puzzle that I needed the guide for was one of these puzzle pieces. When you place it on the board, you can move it around, and there's a little ledge on it that you could actually stand on. If you place it in the right spot on the little board, you could then climb a ladder and use that little piece of platform on the puzzle piece to get across a gap that you need to get to a different puzzle piece. So like the puzzle piece was part of a different puzzle. Fucking incredible stuff. This game is not for the faint of heart, but if you do try Braid Anniversary Edition, push past that opening like hour, because the game, it's not friendly. It's not holding your hand. It really is. I mentioned Animal Well earlier and how that game doesn't hold your hand, and that was a big problem because the world is so large and you can't see anything beyond the screen that you're in. But what I loved about Braid is its gallery style presentation of its puzzles. You see everything you need to see right in front of you. There's no other screens that you need to bring something over here and that item across the world, across the game map, you need to bring there, but you don't know if it'll work, but you have to go try it anyway. None of that. Everything you need is right in front of you for this puzzle. And just stare at it and you'll figure it out. And fuck, this game is amazing. Braid Anniversary Edition, one of my favorite experiences of the year. And just, I loved how this game made me feel. When I started beating, some of these levels and some of these puzzles, going back to old puzzles that kicked my ass and figuring them out. Oh my god. I didn't love this game much for its story. Mainly its puzzle design and how difficult it is and the feeling, that elation of figuring something out that you've been stuck on and getting to the next puzzle. It's an incredible game. Shout out Braid Anniversary Edition. Fucking incredible. Let me move on. I'll move on now to the top 5. My number 5 game of 2024 is another Crab's Treasure. They say one crab's trash is another crab's treasure, baby. This is such a fucking interesting game. Fuck, it's a indie Souls-like That's right, where you play as a fucking hermit crab in the sea. Where do I even begin with this goddamn game? All right. Like I said, this is a Souls-like, and so you're fighting enemies and you're going around, and I love this game's world. I love this game's music. This is Aggro Crab's second ever game. Their first game is called Going Under. You're in an office, and there's all these different... So what I loved about this game is being able to pick up different items and different shells and use them. It's very similar to the studio's first game, Going Under, where you're using like all these different office supplies. That's like a dungeon crawler roguelike. This game is a Souls-like, and what you're picking up are different shells. So there's like bottle caps, there's like rubber ducks, and different coconut shells. There's all these different items in the world that you could pick up and use as a protective shell for Krill, which is the little crab that you play. And each of these shells has different defense stats. They have different abilities as well. So like the little, like the soda can, for example, shell. That shell allows you to spit out a bunch of bubbles that go and home in on your enemy and do damage. The little bottle cap shell, for example, does a little flip attack, and they flip the enemy up in the air. So like each of these things, and there's a lot of overlap. There's like about 60 or so shells in the game, and a lot of them have the same ability, but I just loved the world of this game and those kind of real world items, getting to use them, and the design, the environmental design of like the city, and you know, these kind of CVS receipts acting like a bridge across a gap. I just love that stuff, and Aggro Crab did it so well. You know, one thing that really did stand out to me in this game and really impressed me is its storytelling. Now, I will say not the best voice acting. I feel like the voice acting in this game was a little not so great. I'm wondering, do certain characters really need a voice? But I think it's all part of the charm. This game has a lot of charm, and I think the voice acting, while not great, adds a lot of charm to this game. But what impressed me the most, or not the most, but what really impressed me about this game was its narrative, where I might get into a little spoiler action, but you know, you're playing this crab Krill who had his shell stolen and is chasing this treasure, is trying to find this treasure along with everybody else in the town. But he wants to take all of it and use it to buy back his shell that was stolen from him, right? And it's this whole thing of, you know, we're all teaming up here and we're going after this treasure, but Krill, we need that treasure more than you do, right? Because Krill needs all of it to buy back his shell. Because the piece of shit shrimp shop, the pawn owner that has his shell and is holding it, put it up for like $9,900 million or whatever the number is, some absurd number, and Krill needs all of it to be able to buy his shell back and go back to the tide pool. But these other characters need that treasure money more than he does. And it's this whole existential conversation of, you know, Krill wants his shell so he could go back to his simple life in the tide pool, but Krill, you know, you've been out here exploring, because before, you know, at the beginning of the game, he's in this tide pool. All he does is like sleep all day in his shell, and he doesn't do anything, right? And he doesn't see the world. He's just over there in his own shell. But he wants to go back to his old life. He wants his old life back of doing nothing in the tide pool with his cozy shell. But these other characters are bringing up the argument of, hey, you know, you're out here in like the real world experiencing life. Do you really want to go back to your old life? When you're out here, yeah, it sucks. You're having to fight all these enemies, and everything's fucked up in the world. But like, you're out here, you're living life. You're finding all these different shells, and meeting new people. And do you really want to go back to your old life? Do you really need to use all that treasure money to get your old shell back and leave, when you could kind of stay here? You've made a name for yourself. You've seen the world. Like, I really did love that kind of conversation that goes on. and that kind of stays with you. It's not just one conversation. Like these characters kind of vaguely bring that up, and then you get to thinking like, am I really doing this for the right reasons, right? On the different shells for a moment, I just loved how disposable everything felt. Obviously you could mark a different shell to like, because you die a lot in this game. Obviously, it's a Souls-like. You could have a different shell come back to you as when you respawn. But I loved how disposable the shells are. You pop one shell on, and you use it, and maybe you take a couple hits, and then it breaks, and you pick up another shell over there, and you use that. And I just love swapping the different shells. I also loved the parry mechanic in this game. It's very, very different from any parry mechanic I've ever experienced, where, to block in this game, you press the block button and Krill goes into his shell. And you could still like move around and walk around with his little feet walking around under the shell, but he's in the shell, he's protected. To parry in this game, you need to come out of your shell the moment you get hit. So you have to stay blocked, stay in your shell, and then release the block button the second that you get hit to parry. And I fucking loved it. It's a little, you have to get used to it. It's a little much to get used to, but once you get the hang of that, it's fucking incredible. It's one of the most unique parry mechanics I've ever seen, and it's really well designed because you're a hermit crab. You're going in your shell, you're popping out, doing all this crazy stuff. I will also say I loved using... There's this ability in this game that lets you skewer different shells to use, because Krill has this fork that he uses, and you could upgrade the fork, but that's the only weapon that he uses. All the shells that you're using, they're on your back, and you use abilities that are separate from your weapon. But you can get the ability to skewer like a different, like some other shell in the environment and use it, and your fork becomes a hammer with that shell that you have on the end of it. So now you have a heavy attack, and I loved the heavy build in this game of finding like a soda can to skewer and use it as a fucking hammer. And then you could swap seamlessly. You could swap the shell on your back with the shell on the tip of your fork. So if that one gets low on durability, you could swap things out and do all these other cool things. I fucking love that. I love the umami attacks, which fuel, which is like a meter that fuels the different shell abilities. This game is really well designed. I love the fucking combat. This combat is really, really well done for an indie studio that has never made a Souls-like before. This is shockingly, phenomenally designed and really, really well made. Again, I just love the bubbly, colorful environments, and the fucking music goddamn hits. I was listening to the track list a couple days ago. Jesus Christ, man. They did not need to go this hard with the fucking music. They did not. It's fucking crazy. Some of the best music on this entire list right here in Another Crab's Treasure, and a really, really great story as well. It really hit me, that story of like, man, Krill, like, do you really want to... It kind of similar to the existential story of Harold Halibut, of like, man, do we want to stay here on the Fedora for the rest of our lives, or we want to get out there back into space? Like, Krill, do you really want to go back to the tide pool? Do you really need your shell back? And spoiler alert, I fucking loved how this game ends, because the entire game I wanted to fucking murder that piece of shit shrimp, that pawn shop owner who held my shell. That's my fucking shell, goddammit. You stole it. It's mine, and I'm gonna fucking kill you. And guess what Krill does? He kills that fucking shrimp at the end of the game. And the game, it's this moment where the game lets you do it. It's like the kill shrimp button. I think the prompt comes up on the screen, kill the shrimp or whatever, and you slice that fool and you take your shell back anyway, without the treasure money. Because fuck you. That's my shell, all right? Fucking love that. Another Crab's Treasure, my fifth favorite game of the year. Holy moly. We're going to move on to number 4, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. Holy shit, this is an incredible game as well. This is a 2D action platformer game I don't think I've ever played a Prince of Persia game. This is wildly different from any Prince of Persia game that I believe has ever been made. It's a 2D Metroidvania, and I fucking love Metroidvania. I love a good Metroidvania. I fell in love with just fucking exploring, and the platforming in this game feels so great. Okay? I was wildly impressed with just how large this game is for a 2D Metroidvania game, and it is made by Ubisoft, so I guess it's no surprise there how large this game is physically, the map size. You just keep coming across more and more large areas, and each part of the map is colored a different color. And I was like, they keep running out of colors. How do they not run out of colors to use as map colors for these areas? You just keep coming across another area and another area, and I never felt overwhelmed by that. In fact, I felt quite the opposite. I didn't feel underwhelmed, but I felt excited to come into a new area that I was going to get to flip around and run around and use different abilities. One of my favorite abilities, one of the coolest abilities in this game, is setting a kind of double of yourself in like midair, for example, and then you can like move forward while that's still there, and then you hit a button and you go revert back to that. And I'm blanking on all the rest of the abilities, but that ability stood out the most to me. And I don't even know what it's called, but it's how you solve puzzles. And I love all the platforming mechanics, but how you solve puzzles with these mechanics is something special. The story in this game didn't really hit me that hard. I do love the kind of group dynamic of the kind of, I think they're called immortals, and they're going through and stuff happens and whatever. The story didn't really grab me, but what I really loved with and what I was really in tune with about this game is the platforming, and also the combat's incredible as well. All these different moves that you can unlock. I'm not huge on action games. It is an action game. I'm not huge on action games that give you like a billion different combos to memorize and try and pull off. This game doesn't give you too much of that. I picked out a couple that I really liked, and I used those, and that was great. And the combat's phenomenal, and using your different abilities as part of combat was fun as well. Some incredible boss fights in this game, but I was really here for fucking how incredible that platforming feels. This game feels like a hot knife through butter. It's one of those games like I couldn't stop thinking about it. I always wanted to get back into this game, and the art style is incredible. The environments are incredible, and the diversity of the different areas. I think there's a snow area. I believe there's also a desert area. There's pretty much any type of biome that you could imagine in this game. I think there's a foresty area. There's a shipwreck area. This game's fucking special. It's probably one of my favorite Metroidvania games that I've ever played. It's up there for me next to like Ori and the Will of the Wisps, which made my list back in like 2020. It's like up there as like with like one of my favorite Metroidvanias of all time. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. What more can I say? What more can I fucking say? If you are a fan of Metroidvanias, let me tell you something right now. Okay? This is a must play. This is a must fucking play. Not even for the story. The story's just fine. It's all about that traversal. It's all about that platforming. It's all about that combat. It's all about that exploration. It's all about the abilities. It's a fucking wonderful game. God damn. Like I want to play it right now. All right, I'm sitting here. I want to fucking play it right now. Okay? But I won't, because I have a video to finish, and I have 3 more video games to talk about. They are my top 3. My number 3 video game of 2024. Is Star Wars Outlaws. That's right. 2 Ubisoft games back to back. Star Wars Outlaws, obviously very, very divisive. Got a lot of hate, got a lot of flack, got a lot of shit. But guess what? Okay, I fucking adored this game. I love stealth games. I fucking love. It might be one of my favorite genres of video games ever are stealth games, and it's sadly a dying genre in the realm of video games. But I am so fucking happy that a AAA Star Wars game, the first ever open world Star Wars game, Ubisoft's first ever Star Wars game, implemented meaningful stealth so well. And what I mean by meaningful stealth is I think about Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where stealth is kind of like, you could do it, but we're going to push you towards open combat instead. Star Wars Outlaws, all of the areas, all of the Imperial bases, all of the areas that you can do stealth in are so well designed. Like, they are like made for. I know it was like a problem because people felt like, oh, they don't want to be forced into stealth. I would stealth around all fucking day. Okay, all day I would stealth around. And these environments and the layouts, how these areas are built, how the enemies have like distinct actual pathing in these stealth areas. So they're predictable. You could read the enemy paths instead of in other stealth games out there where it's kind of like random. They're not really following the same path the same way. In Star Wars Outlaws, everything is designed to a T that allows you to viably get through there stealthily. Okay? Going through under a vent, climbing over here, this enemy's going to turn here, but then he turns back. Like, I just fucking adored this game's stealth system. It's the best. Well, shit, that's a good question, because the number 2 game that I'm about to talk about next also has incredible stealth, but we'll get there when we get there. Okay? I was blown away by how well this game does stealth. But speaking on the rest of the game obviously, first ever open world Star Wars game, and there are, I believe, 3 different open worlds. They're not, and I loved how they're not that big. I'm so tired of Ubisoft open world games being so fucking unfathomably large. Star Wars Outlaws, all very digestible open worlds. There's Tashara, which is the first world you are. It's kind of like this kind of Sahara-y kind of just normal ass biome. Then you have Tatooine, which is the desert planet, obviously. Then you have Akiva, which is the foresty, kind of rainforest type of environment. And I loved how all of these areas were designed. They were designed distinctly, where like it's not just a big fucking expanse, it's crafted well. You know what I mean? Like there's, here's, on Tatooine, here's the most isolated cantina, but then there's this path under this ridge, and then it goes across there, and it's all very digestible and compact, and it's not massively huge that it overwhelms you, right? I loved, I would say Tatooine's the most open. Tashara's also the most open. Akiva's different because it's a rainforest, and you really have to follow like the different paths to get around. You can't just go across like different pieces of land like you can in Toshara. Like you have to really follow the different paths in Akiva, and it kind of made it a little difficult to get around because you use the speeder, and I love the speeder. I love how it sounds. But you use the speeder, and it's tough because you could get, you have to pull up the map a lot more on Akiva than you do on Tatooine because you could just fucking go across the fucking desert, right? There's one other planet that I didn't mention. That's Kijimi. That's the snow planet. I think it was introduced in episode 9. It's the kind of nighttime. I think it's always nighttime on Kijimi. It's always snowy. I fucking love this planet, and it's so different from the other 3 planets. Because the game lets you choose where to go next. I chose to go to Kijimi next, and I thought Kijimi was such a perfect change of pace because Kijimi is not an open world. I mean, it's an open area, but it's just the city. It's just a little town, just a little city, and and you just walk around. You can't get on the speeder. You just walk. You just run around the little town and the little rooftops, and I fucking loved Kijimi because it was not a big expansive world. We have 3 of those already. I loved that change of pace. Kijimi was my favorite planet in this game. It was so cozy. It was so like fucking snowy. I love that shit so much. But I another thing I loved are of course the crime syndicates, where different areas of these worlds are controlled by different cartels. There's the Hutt cartel, there's the Pikes, there's the Crimson Dawn, and I believe one other one I'm blanking on. I'll put it on the screen, but like, having different standings with these different organizations can allow you or disallow you to move freely through the thing. So through the world, so through different parts of these worlds. So if there's an area that you need to get into, let's say it's on Toshara and it's like a Pike area and it's red because you have bad standing with the Pikes. You shit in their cereal this morning, so you can't walk around freely in there because they'll all kill you. So what you do is you could go and take a Pike contract job, and you could go do that really quickly, and you can improve your standing with that crime syndicate. And you could also there's different ways to improve your standing with them. You could sell intel or whatever, but you could do these little things for them to improve your standing with them so that they like you now. And there's a little meter with poor, bad, good, and excellent status for each of these organizations. And I think also mediocre is in there. And if you're in mediocre or good, they'll let you walk around their areas freely on any world. Wherever you are, you're in good standing with them, you could walk through here. So I would only really walk through an area and go to an area if I knew that I was in good standing, because I don't want the conflict. I don't want to go guns blazing. I want to get to where I need to go without any hassle. So I would go and do the little contract missions to improve my standing with the different organizations. I love how because of that, my standings with each of these organizations fluctuated throughout the game. So I started out with Pike very bad, and then I need to go and do this thing in their territory. Let me improve it. And then later on in the game, it dropped again because I wanted to cozy up to some other organization, and that affected this relationship. And I loved how all that worked and how that was built into the open world of being able or not being able to walk around in an area freely. I thought that was very smartly done on Ubisoft's part, and it made the open world a lot more interesting, where you have to kind of take that into account when you're exploring. I just felt so immersed in the world of Star Wars Outlaws, where I love how organic the different kind of missions and and side quests kind of come up, where you could just be listening to somebody in a bar. I think it's called different intel, because there are different. There's the main mission and then intel missions, where you just come across different things and encounters, and they tip you off on something, and you go check it out. There's a cache over there, there's a stash over there, or somebody who needs your help over there. But how that is all presented to you is so organic, and you just come across it. And it immerses you so much in the world. And I loved gambling. I loved the kind of horse races. And God, let me tell you about Sabacc. Sabacc is so fucking incredible. Sabacc might be my favorite ever mini game card game in a video game ever. I fucking fell in love with Sabacc. I played it every chance I got. I could not get enough of Sabacc. God damn, I love the missions that are tied to it. I loved it, and falling in love with Sabacc only made me feel more immersed in the world of Star Wars Outlaws. God damn, the combat's great as well. Now, here's the thing, though. I will say on the narrative front, I do like K-Vest, or K-Vest, as some would put it. I like K-Vest, and I like some of the characters, but I just feel like the overall narrative fell very flat for me. I didn't really care that much about ND5. I did like a moment near the end with Slero and I believe his brother aboard a Imperial ship. There was an interesting moment there, but you're finding these crew members to go on this heist back in Canto Bight, where the game begins and where Kay grew up. You're going and you're building this crew, and there are some really, really incredible moments and incredible linear level design in this game as well. But I kept talking about the open world. There's some fucking and the traversal and I'll get to that. But I just think the overall narrative fell flat for me. Of okay, we're going on this heist again, and that's kind of it. I wanted more from this narrative. But on the linear level designs, because there's these open worlds, but there are also these little story areas where you're going and it's very linear, and I thought the level design there was fucking incredible, and I loved the platforming in this game. It's very, very, very different from, like, for example, the Star Wars Jedi games with Cal Kestis, because he's a Force user. Kves is not a Force user. She's just a scoundrel. And I loved, because, I love that, most Star Wars things would have her pick up a lightsaber at some point or whatever. She never touches a lightsaber. I don't even think a lightsaber appears in this game. I could be wrong. But I loved how, like, no, she is a scoundrel, and she's not going to be flipping. She doesn't flip around. She's not doing all these crazy things. She has, like, a rope, like a grapple claw or whatever that she uses to climb up. And I love just, like, swinging across gaps, climbing up ledges. I fucking love climbing in video games, and I think this game does it really, really, really well, especially for a character who's not a Force user, who can't do all the crazy wall runs and stuff like that. Yeah, I just felt so immersed in Star Wars Outlaws, and Nyx is also a big part of that, because you could send Nyx to go do things in the environment, to go distract an enemy. You could send Nyx to go pick a pocket of, like, an Imperial Guard or whatever and gain some extra cash to use in the horse races. I loved Star Wars Outlaws. It's definitely, most certainly, one of my favorite games of the year. I just wish the story was a little stronger, but man, I just loved exploring and I loved how those open worlds were designed and walking around the little cities like Mirogana. And I loved also the fucking, you could fly ships. That's another thing that I didn't mention, is you could fly, and I know it's a loading screen. It's like a really well-hidden loading screen, but you could fly from a planet into space seamlessly. And that went such a long way. And of course, I know it's a loading screen, but it went such a long way to making me feel immersed in this world, right? And there are these little, like, space stations, a little too few of them, but up in some of the space areas, you could go land in, like, a little space station, and it's like a gambling hub, and it's like a little cute little thing. I love that too. I think the spaceship combat's really solid as well. The ship controls really well. As fucking this ship is smooth as hell to control, and I didn't do much space exploration, but when I did, it felt really, really fucking good. And I loved each of the different space areas out in the orbit of each of the planets looks different. Like the Kijimi one is filled with, like, ice clouds and all this shit, and it's not just plain space a lot of the time, right? I think the Tashara one is like all this, like, rockiness, or that might be Tatooine, I don't know, but they change it up visually and environmentally in the space areas. And as a big lover of stealth, man, like, it felt so good to stealth. I was able to, like, stealth through an entire Imperial base with no problem. I did that multiple times and multiple occasions during this story, of, like, getting from outside the base to the core of where I need to be in this enemy base. I was able to do it, not easily, but without alerting anybody. And that is the mark of fucking incredible stealth design. Shout out Star Wars Outlaws. Everybody hates you. I love you. Got to move on now to my number 2 of 2024. It's Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Or as I like to put it, Indiana Jones, throw that ass in a circle, all right? Because this game is fucking incredible. I've never been a big fan of Indiana Jones. Prior to this past November, I've never seen an Indiana Jones movie, right? I watched, because I knew that this game takes place in between the first 2 movies, so I watched the first movie back in November before the game came out. And I thought it was okay. I thought it was okay. I wasn't blown away by any stretch of the imagination, but Indiana Jones and the Great Circle did blow me away. More than the first film did. I fucking fell in love with this goddamn game. And I didn't really expect to love it this much. This is from Machine Games. They've done the Wolfenstein franchise, or the rebooted Wolfenstein franchise, that I fucking adore. Wolfenstein 2 back in 2017 made my list. Where do I even begin? So, unexpectedly, this game features a lot of stealth. And obviously, a lot of fist fighting and hand-to-hand combat. You also incorporate the whip into it quite a bit, and you could do a lot of different things with the whip. You could use it to climb. You could use it to grab a weapon out of an enemy's hand, or to stun an enemy while you rush in for a follow-up punch. But I was not expecting this game to feature stealth so prominently, and I was pleased. You know, obviously I've talked about how much I love stealth in Star Wars Outlaws. I couldn't believe that this stealth was built like this in Indiana Jones, and I thought, you know, this game has a very, unlike Star Wars Outlaws, has a very sandboxy feel, because it's in first person, and you could pick up a whole bunch of different types of items, right? There are, you know, the environments are littered with brooms and items and fly swatters and pans and skillets that you could pick up and use as weapons. And it felt like this game, it feels so sandboxy in how you as Indiana Jones, you know, for example, like a torch, for example, you're in like a tomb in Giza, right? And you have this torch because it's dark. And you have to swing across a gap, but there's no light on the other side. So what you do is you could toss the torch over the gap and then swing across and then pick the torch back up. Like when you drop items, and you have to drop items a lot, like you don't grow attached to any of the weapons that you have, right? Because if I have to climb a ladder, you got to drop the broom that I'm carrying, and you have to find something else up there to use to continue to do whatever you're doing, whether that's stealthing through or if you're in like a fight. I'll say that this game didn't click with me immediately. The game starts you out in the Vatican, is like the first area. There are a couple areas, right? There's like the Vatican, where you get to like explore the Sistine Chapel, and like it's very blocky in terms of different. It's just like a series of hallways and courtyards and staircases and buildings, and you could climb up on like the rooftops and stuff. This is not an open world game by any means, but you know, that Vatican level or area, because these are more than just levels. These are large, open, explorable areas rather than just levels, I would say. Because there's a lot to like explore and uncover, and different secrets and areas that you could go to. But I feel like the Vatican area was very blocky with just a lot of, you know, buildings and hallways and stuff. Where this game really started to click with me, though, was in its second area in Egypt, Giza, right? Where you're in there and it's the desert, right? I love how this game transitions you from place to place with like the little map thing. But you arrive in Giza, and now the area, unlike the Vatican, is a lot more open. It's still not this open world, but like it's a lot more open, where there's a lot of space between the different camps and the different areas, and you can just run, you just leg it. And this is where the game really clicked with me, is when we got out of the halls of the Vatican and out into Egypt, and just being able to come across different little secret tombs on your way somewhere, or different little huts that have like maybe a note. And I read every single note in this game because I cared about this world so much. I cared about the story and Indiana Jones so much in this game. I read every single word on every single note that I came across, and I loved Indiana Jones's little like notebook, his little journal thing that you could go back and read stuff, and that's where the map is, that's where the mission log is, and everything like that. I just loved exploring Giza and the little tombs, and getting the lighter and being able to, like, you know, shimmy underneath a wall and break down a wall with like a club. Exploring those those Egyptian tombs were probably a highlight of this game because they're just designed so fucking well. I loved swinging across gaps. And yes, this game isn't first person, but it's strange because when you're climbing something or swinging across a gap on Indy's whip, it pushes you out to third person just for that little traversal moment. And at first it was a little jarring because some of these swings are really brief, so you pop out and then you pop back in almost immediately. But at a certain point, I just stopped noticing because it's so seamless, it's so quick that it just felt right. I loved climbing in this game and swinging across gaps and doing all this kind of stuff, doing the traversal as Indiana Jones, especially when it pops out in third person, is just fucking incredible. And I just love the layout of these Egyptian tombs. There's this other moment that this game, Machine Games, just has the chops. It has the comedic chops, and it does it so well. Where there's this moment, this is a story spoiler, where Indiana Jones is like stuck in sand and his hands are like tied, and he gets like abandoned in the middle of the desert, and there's these scorpions coming at him towards his face, and he's like buried up to his neck, so he can't move. And it's this really cool, fun little game mechanic where you have to blow the scorpions away from his face for like 5 minutes, and they keep coming after you, and you're just blowing these scorpions away, and then you get rescued by one of your friends. What's her name? Gina is her name. But yeah, so from Egypt you go to I forget this snowy area. I forget where. I'll put it up on the screen, where there's this giant ship that crashed, and you have to explore the little ship, and it's more of like the tight corridor area. It's not one of the open areas. Like I'd say there are 3 areas in this game that are open. There's obviously the Vatican, the more open Giza, and then the last area in the game, well, the second to last area of the game, is Sukhothai, this kind of rainforesty jungle with like a lot of stone ruins and stuff to explore there. But in between Giza and Sukhothai, the jungle, there's that, snow mountain, that snowy mountain with the ship, but also you get like time transferred through, like, I don't know if it's a time transfer or just a physically relocated to a different part of the world, but you go to like Shanghai, where there's this airplane war raging, and that's like a little linear, more action set piece moment. And then after the jungle, for like the last part of the game, you're in, I believe, Iraq, this kind of stone ruin, like crypt in Iraq, and that's where like the final part of the game takes place. But yeah, oh man, the stealth in this game is incredible. I loved, how disposable, kind of like Another Crab's Treasure, where you're constantly picking up different items to use as weapons in stealth. Right, you're constantly picking up a broom, and maybe that broom breaks. Like, I love fucking breaking brooms and shit over Nazis' heads. They just fucking shatter. So when you pick up a weapon, it might break, or you might have to drop it to climb a ladder. So I love how disposable all these different items feel, and it plays into that kind of sandboxy feel of the game, where you're just dropping items and dropping the torch and then picking stuff back up that you need. And the physical, like the physics of it all felt very sandboxy, and I loved that. And I did not expect that from this game at all. From an Indiana Jones game, for it to feel like this kind of first-person sandbox, in going through and exploring these environments with these items. But yeah, I fell in love, and the story was really, really good too. I wouldn't say it's my favorite story on this list. We'll get there with the next game. But the story of this game was really solid. There's one moment in particular when you first arrive in Sukhothai, where you're at this like kind of hotel, and Indiana Jones and Gina are there, and there's this kind of love between them that's kind of starting to come to the forefront a little bit, right? There's something there between them. But Indiana Jones takes a call, and this is a big spoiler tag, takes a call on like a payphone in the hotel lobby, and it's from the university that he teaches at, that he's been fired. And at that same point in time, the giant character that's been following them and kind of almost hunting them down or warning him throughout the game, he fights him at 2 earlier points in the game, or 3 earlier points in the game at this point. But the giant comes back and like warns him not to continue his search for the different pieces of the Great Circle. And it almost felt like a dream sequence where like did the giant really show up in this moment? Because he's on the phone, he's got Gina yelling at him trying to get a room to stay in this hotel. He's getting fired right there on the spot. Like this, a lot happened in that moment and in that cutscene. It was probably my highlight of the game, of just like kind of Indy navigating these different things that are going on. He's being threatened and warned by the giant. He just got fired. He's got this blossoming, love interest in Gina, and there's that going on, and I just love where this game goes with all of that. It's Indiana Jones: The Great Circle surprised me so much. I knew the pedigree of the developer behind Machine Games. I knew how great that studio is, but I never cared at all about Indiana Jones until right now. I feel like the urge to watch all the rest of the movies. Like I loved exploring every nook and cranny of these areas, and reading every single word written down, and the stealth, and I loved how you stealth in this game. You have to sneak up behind an enemy, obviously, but there's no prompt. What happens is you have to pay attention to Indy's hand, and when he cocks back the weapon that you're holding, that's when you know that you can trigger the stealth takeout. And the hand-to-hand combat in this game felt so great. I loved getting into fist fights. It was so satisfying. The sound design is so crisp. And oftentimes I forget that I could even go hand to hand, because I'd be getting attacked by enemies and I'd be looking for weapons on the ground, but I didn't really need to, because I forget that I could just punch them in the mouth. This game's great. This game is phenomenal. It's my second favorite game of the year. But it's time for me to move on now to my number 1 of 2024. My 2024 game of the year is none other than Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth. You already know what time it is, baby. It's Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth. I mean, what the motherfuck can I say about this shit? What can I say? I've been falling in love with the Like a Dragon games since 2020, when Yakuza Like a Dragon came out. Obviously, last year, or 2023, was a huge year where they put out 2 different games in Like a Dragon, Ishin and Gaiden. Ishin in 2023 was my number 3 game that year. Finally, the Like a Dragon franchise has reached the top of one of my lists with Infinite Wealth. This is far and away the best video game narrative of the year. As is pretty standard. Like, this team, RGG Studios, has maybe the best narrative team in the entire industry. And I'll get into why this narrative is so great. Of course, the turn-based combat is back, but this time you can move your character around yourself. So in Yakuza Like a Dragon, you had no control over the positioning of your character. All you did, they kind of moved around on their own, and all you did was pick the attacks. This time, you can move them around, and you could line up different attacks, and there's this new system where you could, if you attack an enemy and launch them into an ally, they'll do a follow-up attack, and all this different stuff you could do. I loved. But this time you're in Hawaii. You're Ichiban Kasuga. I fucking love him. He might be one of my favorite video game protagonists of all time. He's sent over to Hawaii, and I just fucking loved the environment. I loved the Hawaiian kind of sunrises and sunsets that you get to experience on the beach with all the buildings and everything, and the little kind of surf shops and restaurants. I adored meeting the two new characters in this game, Chitose and Tamazawa, who are, what I want to talk about first and foremost is this game felt, and I have I've yet to play any of the original Yakuza Kiryu games. This game in many ways felt like the Avengers endgame of the Like a Dragon and Yakuza franchise, where you have characters from every corner of this universe coming together and working together, right? The new characters and the old ones, and the characters that were obviously introduced. You have, obviously Ichiban, Sachan, you have Adachi, Nanba, all like the original characters from the first game. You also have Zhao coming back. You also have Jungi Han coming back. All these characters coming back and coming together to form this like super crew of like 10 people. And I fucking loved every single minute of it. And I thought that the introduction of these two new characters in Chitose and Eric Tamazawa from Hawaii, and seeing them integrate into this crew, seeing them meet some of the other members, was phenomenal. Partway through this game, about maybe halfway or maybe 40% of the way through this game, and it's a long game, about 40% of the way through, obviously the game starts out the game starts in Ijincho, where where Yakuza Like a Dragon took place. And then, that you spend like the intro in Japan or Yokohama, right? You spend the intro there and then you go fly to Hawaii, and that's where you are. But then 40% of the way through, Kiryu-san, who meets up with Kasuga in Hawaii, is sent back to Japan. And what happens is the game opens up basically another entire game within the game. Of now, you have Ichiban and crew in Hawaii. And then you have Kasuga and crew back in Ijincho. And they're both doing different things, and they're both working towards like a similar goal and communicating, and it's fucking epic. It's so fucking epic, and my jaw was on the floor when I realized, oh, now we're back. We've been in Hawaii for several hours and hours and enjoying the hell out of it. Now we're back at Ijincho, and we're starting this whole other thread of the story with Kiryu back in Japan, with Nanba, with Zhao, with Jungi Han. Actually, Jungi Han goes back to Hawaii. It's so fascinating because you have characters kind of swapping sides and flying back and forth sometimes, where, you had Adachi and Nanba show up in Hawaii. Adachi stays, but then Nanba goes back to Japan with Kiryu, and then meets up with Zhao and meets back up with Jungi Han from Yakuza Like a Dragon, as well as Sanhee. But man, like, I just loved how that story kind of splits, and there's another moment later in the game where the entire crew in Hawaii has to go to Japan, right? And Eric Tamazawa, who, Chitose was born and grew up in Japan. Tamazawa grew up in Hawaii, and he gets involved in Kiryu's crew and becomes a member and a really, really close friend to Ichiban and Kiryu and everyone else. But when it comes time for them to go back via boat to Hawaii, Eric kind of doesn't want to, and he wants to stay, or actually, when they go to Japan, Eric wants to stay in Hawaii, and there's this moment on the boat as they're about to depart where Ichiban is on the boat and Eric is still on Hawaiian soil, and he doesn't want to get on the boat. And as the boat's pulling away, Ichiban kind of walks slowly towards the back of the boat as the boat's leaving to stay in front of Eric. And Ichiban kind of stares in his eyes as the boat's leaving. And it's this beautiful moment between these two characters. And Eric jumps into the boat at the last second and he goes with the crew. But oh my god, like how these characters are so amazing. And I love all the different mini games, as is standard within all these Like a Dragon games. All the mini games are great, but my favorite one by far is still the karaoke, and there's this one song by, I think, Zhao. And I think it's his only song in the game, and it's just kind of like love song, and it's just fucking god. It's the song, the karaoke songs, and the performances by these voice actors in this game, phenomenal in these karaoke, in the whole game in general. But in these karaoke, these song performances are fucking incredible, and one of them almost made me cry. I deeply, deeply love and adore all these characters and the relationships between all of them. And exploring Hawaii, there's these little bingo cards for each of these characters, like as part of like the bond system. And part of what I loved about exploring the Hawaii map is, on the way, there's so much to do in the Hawaii map. On the way to whatever the next objective you're going for is, there's these little like moments in these areas on the map where you could stop and have a conversation with one of your friends, and it fills out a little bingo card, and it's just a short little 40-second convo, and it's really, really cool to like get these characters like that in the context of that Hawaii map and that game world. And there's so much to do in between objectives on the way. There's this kind of hello system, this kind of social media app where you wave to somebody and they fill out like a little meter, and you get like another friend on the friend list or whatever. And there's this kind of dating app game, ton of other mini games, but like just in the world, you get to do so much on the way to wherever you're going in this world. The villains, the boss fights are crazy. This game is wacky as hell. As these games are always crazy, but this game is wacky as it's ever been. You're fighting sharks and all this other crazy shit. There's this yakuza called Yamai, who is based out of Hawaii, who's from Japan, and he serves as like one of the main antagonists. And I don't know how many times I had to kick this guy's ass in combat. Like there's so many Yamai boss fights in this game, and then you end up like kind of joining forces a little bit, but you're still kind of enemies, and he runs away. There's all this kind of story stuff. This is one of the richest narratives in any game I've ever played, and a lot of that has to do with the game's length. I talked about Persona not having the support for its game's length. Like a Dragon Ishin is almost just as long, but I cared so much about these characters, and this game world is large enough to support the game's length, because it opens up that, like I said, that whole other section back in Japan, which almost feels like an entirely separate, different game. So the length is supported by this game's by the size of this game's explorable world, and a whole bunch of different things. Like the combat is incredible. I mean, I don't know what else to even say about this game. It's such a pretty game. It's the Hawaii, the environment of Hawaii is so beautiful to explore, and to just run around in and use the Segway on. There's nothing like loading up the Segway and cruising through while that sunset's going down along the beach. It's fucking incredible. What a game. And there's this, to close it out, right? To close out this 100 hour long JRPG is back in Hawaii. I mean, back in Japan. I think this game ends in Japan because everybody, it's crazy because it's like two different games with Ichiban and Kiryu in Hawaii and Japan, but I think it ultimately ends back in Japan, where Ichiban has this moment with some other character who's not part of the core group, but he's like kind of like an outlier, and he ultimately turns out to be one of the bad guys, but Ichiban like has this really incredible moment. It's this slow motion musical moment where he carries him through the street because he's like injured, and he carries him. His name's Aichan, I think. Carries him through the street of Yokohama, and he's getting like pelted with items, with like garbage and shit. And it's just incredible slow, kind of similar to Harold Halibut's moment that I mentioned earlier in the video. This incredible slow motion, turn that music up, and just fucking get your heart touched right now. Moment as something else is going on that I'm not going to touch. Simultaneously, it cuts between Ichiban's moment carrying this man, and then some other moment with Kiryu that I'm not going to spoil, with the other members of the crew also in Japan, and it's cutting back and forth between these two different things that are happening at the same time, all with this great song and in slow motion to cap off a fucking incredible video game, my favorite video game of 2024, and maybe even my favorite Like a Dragon game ever. If I were to rank the 4 Like a Dragon games that I've played so far, I'd probably put Gaiden at the bottom, then Yakuza Like a Dragon, and then 1 and 2 would go to either Ishin or Infinite Wealth. It might go to Infinite Wealth, if I'm being honest with you. I just love how every corner of this universe, you got characters coming from every corner of this universe. You got Sawashiro back in Japan doing stuff. You got Dwight, who's like a new villain. You got Bryce, who's another one of the Palakana villains. Just so much. Kiryu, everything that happens with Kiryu, and just splitting the game in half and saying, hey, Ichiban's in Hawaii, Kiryu's going back to Japan, and to start up a whole other part of the story and part of the game. And the game switches back and forth between that for you. You don't really get to choose whether you want to do Ichiban's stuff or Kiryu-san's stuff. The game has that all set out for you when it switches between chapters or whatever. And then once you beat the game, it opens up and you could switch at your own will. But man, what else more can I say about this game? Just a phenomenal story, phenomenal world, phenomenal turn-based combat. It's my number 1 for a reason. And guess what? This has been my top 10 games of 2024. Thank you so much for sticking around and listening to me gush about my favorite games of the past year. I quickly wanted to give a quick shout out to all of the incredibly talented developers that made each and every one of these 10 games. Shout out to EA Orlando, Slow Bros, Catchweight Studio, Atlas P Studio, Thekla Inc., Agro Crab, Ubisoft Montpellier, Massive Entertainment, Machine Games, and Ryuga Gotoku Studio for making these 10 games. They were my favorite of the year. What were your favorites of the year? If you want to let me know, drop it in the goddamn comments, all right? Do whatever you want. What a year for video games. A lot of smaller games, a lot of indie games, and AA games that made my list, but also some incredible AAA games. I mean, my top 3 were all AAA games. This has been my top 10. Thanks so much for sticking around, and until next time, I'll see you later. Goodbye.
Anyone thirsty?